Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the last and final day of the virtual discussions that are marking the Global Ethics Week, more so the Global Ethics Day today, with the support of our esteemed partners, including ACCA, ICMA Pakistan, CFA Society Pakistan, the Pakistan Business Council, Pakistan Stock Exchange, and HBL. And of course, thank you for our esteemed panelists for taking out the time to be with us here today. I am Shireen Mehdi, Program Manager, Ethics and Governance at the Pakistan Business Council. The discussion from the last 2 days have shown a substantial increase in the scope and significance and impact of corporate, social, and environmental initiatives in recent years, illustrating the growing materiality of a more ethical informed approach in Pakistan, thus reaffirming the need for today's leaders to focus on creating sustainable companies and embrace the legal and moral atmosphere in which they conduct business, develop a position of environmental concern, show responsibility towards the communities they operate in, as well as meet the ever-changing needs of our eco-savvy consumers. And thus, without further ado, I would want to share that today's welcome remarks will be made by Mr. Umar Zahir Mir, Chairman, ACCA Member Network Panel, Pakistan, which will then be followed by a panel discussion on workplace ethics, force for public good, accelerating inclusive and economic growth, moderated by Aisha Aziz, CEO at Pak Brunei Investment Company Limited, Almas Haider, Chairman, Synthetic Product Enterprises Limited and Engineering Development Board, Ms. Naz Khan, Chief Strategy Officer at K Electric, Farooq Khan, CEO, Managing Director at Pakistan Stock Exchange, and Jamal Nasser as Chief Human Resource Officer, HBL. So before we can start our panel discussion, I will have Umar take the stage for welcome remarks.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I would like to congratulate ACCA, CFA, Society Pakistan, CERB, HBL, ICMA Pakistan, Pakistan Business Council, and Pakistan Stock Exchange, who have all collaborated to bring together these series of high-level conversations focused on the theme, the big conversation, with the agenda to discuss how we can make the workplace a better place, more ethical place, generating more businesses. So today's topic is workplace ethics, force for public good, accelerating inclusive economic growth. And as my colleague has just shared with you, today is the last day. By the way, today being 21st of October is also the Global Ethics Day 2020. And similar events are happening all across the globe on the platform of ACCA. ACCA places extremely high value on ethics and being the leading voice in the field of accounting and finance, it always champions the agenda of ethics. So ethics, I think we have all these big names here, some of whom I do have the honor of knowing, like Almas Saab is there, Jamal Nasser Saab, Farooq Saab, Shiri Mehri Sahiba, Naz Khan, and Aisha Aziz. So you'll be having a very fantastic panel discussion. But before that, why ethics is important? Being the chairman of ACCA's member network panel and the chair of the taxation subcommittee, who also sit on the Global Taxation Forum and the editorial board of Policy Insights for the MESA region, as well as being a part of the Professional Experts Forum and several other think tanks as well, I often come across this question that how relevant is ethics in today's day and age? One simple answer that I always give to everyone is, if you have ethics, nothing else matters. If you don't have ethics, nothing else matters. So at the end of the day, what matters is how ethical you are. And it's not just about being moral. Even if somebody is thinking from a purely materialistic or a business standpoint, it is good business to be ethical. So if we are talking in the context of workplace, think about the different scenario. One scenario can be a businessman at a workplace dealing with the outside stakeholders. That by virtue is setting an example for the inside stakeholders, the employees, etc. So a company can't have a culture where they are not delivering on commitments to the outside stakeholders, but then turn around and expect absolutely different behavior from the employees, etc. So that's not going to work. We need to set examples for the inside stakeholders as well. Similarly, if we talk about employees, not people who are running the business, but the people who are working inside the business, firstly, how are they dealing with their employer? And not just the employer, how are they dealing with all the various stakeholders? Because the employees are the faces of the business. They might be dealing on business behalf with the customers, with the suppliers, with the regulators, etc. Many times we face scenarios where we have to make hard choices. We have to decide whether to focus on the long-term objective or immediate short-term gain at the cost of long-term objective. I'm sure our learned panelists will be sharing more examples. I'll just share a very brief incident with you, which has always stayed with me. While I was working in London, that was after I completed my articles, I moved to London, and I was working as a director of finance in a company, and we hired a recent trainee, and that trainee was actually associated with the owner of the company, basically engaged with the family member of the owner of the company. So that particular trainee came late one day, and we had a very good ethical atmosphere, very punctual, not lying, delivering on commitment, etc. So this particular trainee came to join us during the peak period when we don't have much time to train the trainees, and the department was reluctant to get her on. But since she was related with the owner, we had to take her on the condition that we would not be able to give her that much of a supervision, and she would have to invest a lot of time in self-learning. So the reason I'm telling this is that she was aware that there was a reluctance in accepting her. One day she came late, and she was called on the disciplinary notice, asked to explain why she came late. And it was very easy. She could have said that, like most of us do, that maybe the cab broke down, or the tube got late, or there was any kind of problem. We did not have any mechanism to actually go and verify that. I hope the voice is clearer. I just got a notice that voice was not very clear. Rashid, can you just give me a thumbs up if the voice is clear now? Okay, it's fine from Shiri's end. So it might be the internet at your end. Anyway, continuing the incident I was sharing with you. So this particular internee, who was just on a notice period at the moment, wasn't even hired as a permanent employee yet. She was given a notice why you came late. And there were so many excuses, a million excuses she could have given. But she actually told the reason that there was a party, she got late, etc., which was, by the way, a very non-professional excuse. And when I got the response, I called her in. I asked her, do you know that you are in the notice period, and based on the response that you have given, you could be fired? This comes under misconduct. You were not supposed to do these things during a working day and be late at your work and miss your commitments. Her response has always stayed with me. She said, yes, I know. I know I can be fired for this, but I don't know what else to tell. I'm very ashamed. I will promise I will not repeat that, but that is the truth. I was very curious, from our background, every day we see people speaking small things which they take for granted in the context of the ethics. So I asked her, why didn't you give any other excuse? I mean, we had no mechanism to verify. I was curious to learn the thought process, the mechanism. Why was she doing what she was doing? And her response was, because that's the truth. So it was like, I can't process that I can lie. And that has always stayed with me. And that is perhaps one of the best examples how businesses progress. Needless to say, not just mine, the entire company's confidence was established on her. And last I checked, she is now running her own company. She went to great heights within that company too. So this goes out to give impetus, especially to our younger audience, that good ethics is always good for business. Even if you think in the shorter term, it might hamper you. Please always remember, in the longer term, in the larger scheme of things, it will always come back to benefit you. So I think I just have a minute or two left of my allotted time. So I would like to end the welcome address by thanking all our distinguished guests who have spared their time to join the session today. I'm also grateful to all our attendees who have taken time out on a working day to join us. And above all, I'm extremely grateful to ACCA and all the partner institutions who have come together to put together this fantastic, thought-provoking session. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you for that, Umar, and for sharing a real-life example of a place where an individual who was driven by ethics and is someone that you still hold in high regard. And right now, I would want Aisha to take forward the panel discussion on accelerating inclusive and economic growth. Thank you, Aisha.
But this is also a very interesting panel. We've got banks and big business and capital markets representing parties that have traditionally been on the wrong side of the ethical debate. But I think a lot has happened since 2008, the financial crisis. We've all learned the limits that corporate greed can go to. And I think in the recent the pandemic that we're still living through, a lot of corporate leaders all over the world are rethinking their very purpose of existence and their social values, because clearly, profit maximization is not what is going to drive the world anymore. So Farooq, my first question is actually going to be to you. Do you see a heightened awareness of this larger purpose and longer term goal in the universe of Pakistani listed companies? Are we in sync with this global mood for something which is more than shareholder value maximization? And if we're not, then how do you see regulators making the necessary push? What are the challenges there?
Thank you, Aisha, and thank you, ACCA and the organizers for putting not just today, but I believe a whole week's activities on this extremely important subject. And the title of this session is interesting. It talks about workplace ethics, and it's obviously a work is for good or bad is where most people spend most of their lives. Your biggest chunk of your life, apart from sleeping, is probably spent at your workplace. So what happens there is not only of importance to everyone as an individual, but also to society at large. And before just jumping into Aisha, into the listed company space, as you said, there are certain morals and ethics which are probably unchanging through centuries and as humanity has developed. But in other ways, ethics and morals do get defined by the particular time in which people live. So as you mentioned, that post the financial crisis, not just ethics and morality, but how success is judged has perhaps also been redefined. And that's been particularly being influenced by the younger generation, that is fast coming up to take on, leadership positions within organizations and within countries. I believe, the regulators and all over the world, including in Pakistan, have moved in that direction. But honestly, to my mind, the culture and as leaders of organization, how we develop cultures in organization, culture eats rules, regulations for lunch, to paraphrase, any day. So how we recruit, how we train our people will in the end make the organization ethical and values driven. Yes, all those statements are important. Obviously, there needs to be a regulatory framework, but all of those frameworks have been there throughout the modern since the corporate form started with back in the East India Company. But we've seen over and over again, whether it was the petroleum industry, whether it was the tobacco industry, whether it is the tech industry right now, that till we are really able to handle the culture aspect of it, rules and regulations will not be sufficient. Within Pakistan, so again, you touched upon things like sustainability, etc., and that is obviously part of values. But I think before we even get to the sustainability stage of conversation, which is really lacking in Pakistan right now, whether it's unlisted or unlisted companies, and the government has only recently started focusing on the environment and sustainable aspects and climate change. I think that the basic morality and ethics of how we do business is what we are still I think work in progress. Although, to be honest, we have made a lot of progress, but we, I believe, are not where we need to be. And as every company has the statements, but as leaders, if we're not coming in every day and thinking about how am I actually implementing those ethics in my day-to-day work and leading by example, that culture is not going to change. I'll stop there now.
True. Well,
I
we'll
don't know
come
if there's
back.
a roundabout way of answering your question.
Yes. No, you have, and we'll come back to the regulatory aspect. But I thought, because I'm a shareholder in Habib Bank shares, and I was very happy to see the fabulous financial performance. So I'll come back to Jamal Saad now, and I'd like to know, the results have beaten a lot of expectations. So how do you ensure this profitability is anchored within a framework that takes into account your responsibility as the largest commercial bank in Pakistan? As a banker myself, I understand there's a lot of ethical dilemmas that we face as lenders, as custodians of public money. So how does the bank, what's your philosophy? If you could perhaps share that in how you're establishing an ethical infrastructure at the bank.
Okay, thank you, Aisha. Look, the way I see this is, one, the tone really starts from the board, and I think that's extremely important and critical in terms of what are they expecting. If all they ask for and expect is how much money you're going to make the next month or next quarter, then you will invariably land up in situations which then will become gray. I mean, you have so many examples. You have global examples. You have extremely large bank in the US, and there was a huge scandal around mis-selling. And so if you're purely driven by profit, you will run into some of these challenges. Whereas, as far as HBL is concerned, I think it's a brilliant balance between making sure that we continue to drive performance. At the same time, I think there's a huge, as our responsibility as the largest bank in Pakistan, there's a huge responsibility on us around financial inclusion. And that's something that we focus on, and the board pushes us very hard as well to make sure that that's an area that we continue to focus on. So it's that balance, it's that tone that comes from the board, and then obviously when at the bank level, that's the tone that you have to push. That there is zero tolerance for anything that is unethical. So that you really build through your culture in the organization. When you do that, obviously, the values, and really what we're trying to do right now is, and then we're doing a lot of that work this year as well, is it's easy to say, these are the corporate values, have them on the wall, and you have them in their drawers, and when you ask them what do they mean, you really struggle for words. What we're trying to do is really translating those values down to behaviors and helping everyone understand. And we've put close to 20,000 of our employees through these sessions this year alone. Is what behaviors do we expect them to demonstrate and live on a daily basis? That's the critical one. So that's the first step. So tell them exactly what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and then put in mechanisms of how you can start to measure some of that. It's great. It's ambiguous at times. As you said, there'll be a lot of dilemmas that you go through, but that's really what you do. That's how you train and educate them. It's not easy, because when you grow up in a certain society, in a certain value system, and you land up in an organization, and the organization says that's not acceptable, this is acceptable, it takes time. Some adapt, some don't adapt. We're an absolute subset of Pakistan. We have 20,000 employees all over Pakistan. The good, the bad, the ugly, we have our share, but it's our responsibility to make sure that people understand exactly what's expected of them, and that, plus making sure that there's zero tolerance for this. And if something goes wrong, you take very decisive and very, very quick action, and make it very, very public, and for people to know that this is not something that we will accept. So that's really some of the things that we focus on and look at driving through the organization.
But I'd expect that, discussion on ethics, and as far as the bank goes, would also go down to who you lend to. What are the practices that your borrowers should be really following for them to qualify? What type of projects? Are they environmentally friendly? Are they projects that make or create value? And I think that's the debate that, at least amongst banks, we should be having. What's the value that we add if we are not investing enough on SMEs or on technology or on agriculture? And I think the ethical debate is therefore a lot bigger than just the values that our employees will carry. So, Almaz Saab, we hear great things about your company, the corporate culture, particularly your own interest in technology upgradation and skill development. So we hear constantly that we lack civic sense in Pakistan. And here we are talking about ethics, and when basically the average man out on the street doesn't even follow traffic laws. So how do you create the story? How do you bring about change? What's the starting point as an entrepreneur, as a leader? What would you like to share as the way ahead if we were to walk the talk?
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you to the organizers. I don't know if the audience speaks English, or some of them don't understand English. Otherwise, I might use a few terms which are in Urdu or Punjabi, if that is okay with you. The title was very interesting. It says, Workplace Ethics, Force for Public Good, Accelerating Inclusive Economic Growth. So the word inclusive was what fascinated me, and I thought that how do I connect ethics to inclusion, which means that every citizen of the country or every employee of the company is part of the benefits that are achieved through ethical behavior in a company or in a country. So I started looking up, and the definition of ethics, I'm sure you've heard it many times, is moral principles that govern a person's behavior or conducting of an activity. Now, whatever these moral principles are, they affect how people take their decisions and lead their lives. Now, when I was at the Harvard, one of the things they taught us was the boundary concept. Everybody has, and every department and every company has a boundary, and you play within that boundary. Ethics is what creates the boundary for a person. And you do whatever you want to do within that boundary. But the moment you start crossing the boundary, that's when the person stops himself, or the family stops themselves, or the company stops themselves, and make sure that they stay within the boundaries that they have defined for themselves. What happens if you are ethical? If you develop trust, now everybody is looking for somebody trustworthy. Everybody. I have never heard any person or any employer say that I don't mind if he's not trustworthy. Now, what is trustworthiness? Trustworthiness is that you have faith in that person about whatever he will do will be within a certain boundary, and then you can make sure that if you take a decision in any direction, it will not conflict with what the whole group is doing or what the people are doing. At one time, Dr. Javed Ghani was in LUMS, and we had a very long discussion on trust relationships. And then we found some books on trust relationships, and we found that societies where the trust abounds, they have less number of issues between people because they trust each other. They don't have to have a chowkidar outside the office, and they don't have to have chowkidar or some person overseeing the other person all the time. If you trust somebody, I think you can cut out at least 2 levels of management in every company. What we are doing in our companies is that there is a whole group of people who are actually doing things, and then we have a supervisor who supervises to make sure that they do those things. And then we have an assistant manager who makes sure that the supervisors do those things. And then we have a manager who makes sure that the assistant managers are working the way they should be. And then there's a general manager who does something else. And then there is somebody, a senior general manager, and then there's a senior executive vice president, and then there's somebody else and somebody. Why do you need so many layers? The only reason you need so many layers is because you don't have enough trust relationship between your own employees or in your own organization or in the country. So if you somehow develop that trust relationship, you can actually cut down the cost of your company.
That's a good point.
Yeah, the next one, there's something called culture. Now, culture is something what everybody does in your organization when the boss is away. Now, that's the simplest definition that I know of. And we make sure that we leave the office, and when we come back the next day, the office is more efficient because I was sitting there stopping them from doing the right things or working. And when I'm away, my subordinates perform much better than I do. If this is not happening in your organization, there's a strong reason why you should review what is happening in your organization. Ethics provides a framework which is both moral and legal. So if, for example, you have in an organization, you've decided not to penalize workers or throw them out without a proper response system or inquiries or whatever, your legal frameworks also become a part of your ethics. It's not just the moral part. So what we have done over a period of time, I thought I had 8 minutes for myself. Am I right, Aisha?
I think you're fine. Why don't you finish this? You're good with time. We still have another 20 minutes. So I should think we're good.
Okay, I don't want to intrude into everybody else's time. It is always so exciting to talk to people like you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have these the organizations and you start the reason why people do ethical things is when the boss does the ethical things. If I ask my accountant to create double books for me so that my family and myself we can prosper, why wouldn't he do it for himself? In fact, he would do it first for himself and then for me. If I tell them to lie to, let's say, the Security and Exchange Commission or the Labor Department or the Tax Department or some other department, why wouldn't he lie for himself also? So we bring in the culture right from the top. And if the top man is ethical, things start falling into place. In our company, for example, we have 3 or 4 reasons why we throw people out. And this is a published document. Everybody knows why this happens. The first is he's reached an age where he's supposed to retire, so he goes home. So that's the first one. The second is moral turpitude. If he murders somebody or does something which is totally, comes under moral turpitude, we can't live with such a person. And the third thing is that if he lies, period. If he lies and we can prove that he lied, irrespective of how important he was in our company, he goes.
Mm-hmm.
So over 30, 40 years, we have developed a group of people we can trust with our eyes closed. They're totally trustworthy people. Why? Because this filtering process has been going on for the last 40 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I can, depend on them with my life. That's the type of people we have. By the way, out of the nearly 700-800 people that work for us at different companies, there are about 6 people who have worked in any other company in their life. Everybody else started their working life with our company. So we don't lose the benefit of experience that we have gained over a period of time. We are probably the only company who can proudly say that only 6 or 7 people, and the 6 and 7 people are chartered accountants, or if he is coming in the administration department, you normally have people from the armed forces or the police or some other place. So those are the people that we have who have ever worked outside our company. Everybody else started their life with us, and we hope they'll retire with us.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Almaz Saab. Very unusual, very interesting. I'll just add one thing.
Just last one thing before I
Please go ahead.
Now, what has happened because of this type of culture that we have developed is that the people who came walking into our company now have bicycles. The people who came on bicycles, they have motorcycles. And the people who came on motorcycles have now cars. That's inclusion. And that's the power of ethics and the power of culture that we have in our company. Thank you.
No, that's great. I'm just going to pick up something that you said. The top man should be ethical. I'll just add to that and say that top woman should be ethical too. So if we were to talk of inclusion and diversity, I'd like to say something that Christian Lagarde famously said. It's a quote that's been quoted at least 100 times, that if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters, it might have been a little different.
I agree with you.
I agree. Almaz Saab की आवाज बंद है.
आपको आवाज नहीं आ रही?
So अब आ रही है. There have been studies that women in leadership roles and on boards where women are more active, they tend to take less unmitigated risks, and actually they have more focus on long-term goals rather than short-term. And I think the same concept might actually be true for companies and their ethical frameworks where there are more women in leadership roles. So Naz, if there's ever a company with the worst possible legacy as far as criminality goes, forget about ethics, it's the one that where you head, you have a senior role as Chief Strategy Officer. So, K Electric has come a very long way, but how do you see yourself strengthening that ethical framework in a company that's been dogged down by so much controversy and so much that's gone wrong?
Thank you, Aisha. That's not a flattering introduction by any means. So I guess I have some work to do on that count.
We expect your legacy to be something amazing. So, that's why I said women are sent often to clean things up. and to
Right.
change the focus. So tell us about,
Right.
what your legacy will be.
Right. So I think it's a fascinating topic, and just listening to all of my other peers here. When you talk about K Electric, and I don't know if you know this, but it's interesting that we talk about ethics. This is a pre-partition company. This is a company that's over 100 years old. Right? This was set up in 1913, when probably even the US, a lot of states in the US didn't have electricity. And it's traveled a long journey. A company that was the first to get listed on the Karachi Stock Exchange, Farooq, in case you didn't know that. It was nationalized, then it was privatized in 2005. And we know what public sector, unfortunately, in the last few years, public sector legacy has been. And since privatization, if you talk of transformation and that journey, I mean, I think K Electric has had an incredible story on that count, right? I mean, not to sort of belittle the public sector, but there is a way that public sector operates when you talk of ethics, etc. And you talk about a company like KESC, which it was, and transforming this, bringing in a culture which is ethical, bringing in a culture which is do the right thing. It's not short of a huge challenge, but KE has come a long way on that count. And really, again, it comes back to what a lot of the speakers here have said, which is it starts with the tone at the top. It is what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what are the behaviors that you want to see, what is it. Ethics has to not only does it do good, but it also has to feel good. You have to create that culture in the company where people feel comfortable, that it's comfortable to be and good to be ethical. And that takes time. Changing the culture of a company takes a very, very long time. Then that understanding, and I'm going to get a little philosophical here. It's easy to say, because when you talk of companies, you're operating in a little bit of a bubble, right? But and so when you talk of ethics, morality, it's a bit of a luxury, right? When you're outside, you have people that are earning just basic salaries or whatever, and you want people to behave in an ethical manner when there is temptation to do, and they have the ability. When you have power, I don't mean electricity, I mean power, and your pay grades are low. So there's a problem there, right? So, and that's why you have issues in public sector. So it really starts with the culture at the top, just saying what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So leadership. Number two, putting that system in place, having your code of ethics, communicating this down the line again and again, taking the necessary action, telling people and communicating, this legal versus ethical debate. And I think we as Pakistanis are very good at it. If it's legal, it's okay. But just because if it's legally right, it just means just that. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's ethically okay, right? Just because you're on the right side of the law doesn't mean you're ethically in the green, right? So leadership, setting the organizational code for it, and then other things like having your speak up policy, reaching out, letting people know that there are systems in place whereby things can come up, ethical dilemmas can come up, and having maybe committees in place where, because you hear the word so often, moral dilemma, ethical dilemma, because there are places where it is a dilemma, where you don't know, is it right, is it not right? And it requires discussion, debate, and the wisdom of more people. So that's one thing in terms of the journey and what you're doing right now. I want to also pick up, when this is a company, it's a utility. You were asking Farooq about COVID and inclusion, and this is a utility, but it is a private sector utility. It is not a public sector company anymore. So, And you know, there are people here, I mean, obviously, who are from Karachi. Many of you have been beneficiaries of the fact that when it got privatized, you may remember 10 years ago, how all of us used to face a lot, I mean, severe load shedding, etc. But many of us are beneficiaries when we came and we did segmented load shedding, where we said there are people that pay their bills, there are people that are great consumers from that way, there are others who steal electricity, who don't pay their bills, and you have to. It's unfair that they should be treated in a similar manner. And you started segmented load shedding, which is now part of the national power policy as well. So people who were residing in certain areas were the beneficiaries of that, and they started getting and services to them improved, power to them improved. So whilst we do load shedding in several areas where our recoveries are extremely low, where there is a lot of kunda, there is a lot of power theft. When we had COVID, now this was a situation where, like we said, it brings everyone down to the same level, right? Whether you're rich, you're poor, it just impacts everyone. You're a private sector company, but we took the call at that point in time when there was a lockdown, when people were sitting at home and people were not in their workplaces, where at least they can still enjoy electricity when they're in their homes. We took the call that, you know what, we will not do a commercial load shed. And that's a loss to us on our bottom line, a direct loss of 200 to 300 million rupees per month. But we took that call for the first, 2-3 months, that we said that we will give people electricity at home, regardless, even if there's power theft. It took a direct hit on our bottom line. So there are those kinds of things that you can do as well, because you felt that it was the right thing to do at that time. You had this feeling of inclusiveness. You feel that it's, people are going through a problem at this point in time. You don't want to, at this point in time, make that business discrimination, right, for the benefit of the bottom line. So,
No, I think COVID has really been a sort of spotlight, and in a digital age, you can't really hide. So I think one of the things that's happened is people can see more clearly what companies and what business leaders have done in this period of time, whether it was customers or employees or suppliers, how they behaved in this period of few months has, in a way, cleared up the ethical debate as well. Like you said, it might be legal, but it is not desirable. And I think business leaders have to make those calls more meaningfully. I'm going to come back. This is a favorite topic, women empowerment, Farooq. And I call ethics, key part of it is having diversity in the workplace, having women in the workplace, giving them equal pay, equal opportunities. But then there's regulations like the ones that listed companies have to follow, in which women have to be on boards of listed companies. And those types of guidelines sometimes feel like forced conversions. Are they really meaningful? Are these types of guidelines something that should be forced, or should they be organic? And then if the regulator comes in and says, okay, this is desirable behavior, this is how companies should behave, what are the monitoring mechanisms? Or is it just enough to put it on paper and, here you've got a woman on the board? Do you then monitor to see whether that is effective or meaningful? Just a few observations from you on that.
Sure, thank you, Aisha. That's a really important topic as well. And broadly, it is about workplace ethics. To me, there is no question that diversity in decision making leads to better decision making. We haven't got specific research in Pakistan, although just by coincidence last week, Sadia Khan, who's the commissioner at ACCP, had reached out, and we are supporting her and PICG and doing a study on seeing, how this diversification on boards is linked to companies' performance. But certainly in a lot of other countries, particularly in developed markets, such research is very, very clear that diverse boards, particularly boards including women, those companies generally, ceteris paribus, perform better than their peers with non-diversified boards. And intuitively, the reasons for that are very clear to me. As I said, it's not just a question of women or men. It is a question of having diverse thinking available to you in that decision-making process. And you're so that, at least as far as PSX is concerned, and now the listed companies are concerned, we are committed. We have women on our board. We have senior women in our first layer of management, underneath the board and the CEO, and really they are some of the best managers that we have. So I'm very unambiguous about it, very, very clear about that. I think your point about whether it should be enforced or not, I think the jury on that is also reasonably clear, not just in Pakistan. I think even in the UK, in a lot of developed countries, it is still very much work in progress. And even there, it has had to start with to be enforced. And even then, we have not reached where there would be, completely equal sort of parity, whether it's pay, whether it's number of, women in senior positions, etc. So I think it is, you and Naz would be able to answer this question better. But I think it is good to have some guidelines and some enforcements to start that momentum, to get people to break out of their comfort zone, and then at least see, how that helps their companies, how that helps in decision making, by having different viewpoints. Women think differently than men, and that is what the great value is when both sort of think together. In answer to your question, I think it is important to have such regulatory measures in place to start the process. Hopefully, over some time, those measures can fall away. But as I said, even in most developed countries, those measures haven't really fallen away yet.
You see, as a banker,
I should
go ahead.
Sorry, if I can add here to what Farooq is saying, at the PSX as well, and I was still recently on that board. One of the things that we had done at PSX was, their top 25 companies award as well. In fact, some of the metrics have been changed in there now, and they have actually been changed to now include, women participation, and not just women on board, but women at the C-1, C-2, C-3 levels that you have to start. Not that you need to have, but you need to start disclosing in your annual report. We said we will give points just for disclosure. Just tell us how many you have, just so that people start disclosing and it starts becoming top of mind. And in fact, sustainability development goals as well. So that's all part of the new top 25 companies.
We've changed it for sustainability as well, and also in our recruitment process. Every sort of shortlist for any position, must have at least one, woman candidate, and I hope ideally more, but at least one. And if that is not the case, then there has to be a really good reason put forward why they were not able to find a suitable woman candidate, because it has to start from your recruitment process that feeds into your teams then.
Well, it's interesting because as bankers as well, we tend to look at the numbers only, the financial statements. We rate them on very specific objective measures. And maybe this is the kind of thing that we need to incorporate. When we do a credit rating, we should be looking at sustainability. We should be looking at, inclusiveness, ethical standards. They are very good customers, and you find out that they've done something unethical. It needs to go into their credit rating. So we need to have those mechanisms so that not just lenders, but also investors are aware that there is more than just the numbers that they need to look at.
I should sorry, just to to add to that and the point you made earlier, and you were talking specifically about banking, and there's an ethics. You have your values. Somebody tells a lie, somebody does something wrong, and that's not acceptable, and you have those clear demarcations. Um, that is very important, but to my mind is relatively easier. I think we also have to look at the ethics of our business. And you gave banking as a good example. I don't want to pick on banking. Both you and Jamal Saab are from banking, but we spoke about financial inclusion, and as a business, how ethical it is to have majority of your balance sheet in T-bills versus actually making the effort to lend money to the sectors that need it. As PSX, how ethical it is if we don't make an effort to have a larger investor base in the country. With such a narrow investor base, it has huge economic and social, it impacts your social and economic inequalities. So we might be very ethical and we might throw out everyone who tells a lie. But in our business, if we are not also creating that impact on society that businesses exist to do, then can we really say that we are being ethical?
Absolutely. And over there, the recent bar on dividends that State Bank imposed on commercial banks, I think that was for me at least, a pretty big move. And while it was used for something specific and for a short period of time, it also shows the kind of power the regulator has. If there's a certain license and it's not adding economic value, the banking sector example is perfect because the license is there for you to lend to SMEs and to agriculture sector and to do value addition. If you don't do that, should shareholders get dividends? And those are draconian, but those are the types of actions that perhaps regulators need to think about. So on that, I think we've sort of reached the question and answer session. Naz, do you have something to say, Naz?
Aisha, so yeah, before you get that, so interesting, Farooq raised that point, and you're talking, Farooq, about the banking and that ethical, that you can make money through T-bills.
I also said PSX.
So that's an ethical.
I don't want to pick on banking only, even as PSX.
No,
we have the ethical responsibility
right.
to create a...
I think it's
right.
And for each business, it needs to think about its impact.
Right. So and it comes down to that shareholder. So banks are doing something which is very rational, right? Because that's what makes money, and you are you have to give shareholder returns because that's where the business is being driven from. So that's why they are taking rational decisions. Now, rational decisions, is it ethical or not ethical? That's the debate you can have. So I want to bring the same debate to when Aisha, you raised the issue of women on boards. It's interesting because when I hear the same debate, is it the right thing to do or not? And that's the reason why you should want to bring people on. It's 50% of the population, globally. So should you have women on the board or not? I mean, to me, that's just from an ethical perspective, right? But when you talk about conducting studies and doing that, that's again, because what sells is the returns, shareholder returns. Hence, that's the way you need to sell that debate, because that's the debate that will sell. So should it be that debate that you need to sell, that I need to show that I can improve my shareholder return and therefore you should bring a woman on the board? Or should it just be an ethical debate?
Okay, so Naz, please go ahead, Jamal sir.
I should, if you allow me, just picking on Naz's point. What we did around 3 or 4 years back, we worked with IFC, and we, as part of our diversity agenda, we put all our staff through diversity training, and so close to 17,000 people went through it. And then we called IFC back, I think around 18 months to 2 years back, and asked them to do the analysis in terms of what impact had it had. And so they came across, and they surveyed branches, they looked at branches where everyone had gone through this training, and they went and they looked at branches which had not. And it was a direct correlation between people having been trained and two things. One, how women were perceived as colleagues, and how positively were perceived. And more importantly, the female customers, in terms of the volumes and the number of female customers in the branches where we had trained the staff was considerably higher. And so when that's higher, obviously the profitability in some of those branches would be higher as well. And that's the kind of research and data which really supports the entire concept about bringing in diversity. That comes to life. And that's some of the things that are important, because as Naz said, you have to demonstrate and show that it's not ambiguous, but it works with dollars and cents as well. It makes a lot of sense.
True. Well, the dollar and cent shareholder wealth maximization, that's been called a poisoned flower. And you could say that the very global system that makes profit and shareholder value above all, it's a poisoned system. So you might actually want to rethink the system rather than want to fit in everything and justify that, let's have women because it also makes money, or let's lend to SMEs because you can still make money. So maybe that system may need to be re-engineered. And Almaz Saab, you're the engineer here. Do you agree that there is a fundamental issue of re-engineering that is needed so that the debate is less about profits and shareholder value and more about social value?
First of all, there is in every newspaper, there's a column which is called op-ed, which is opposition to the editorial. So let me start from there. When we go and buy a product from the market, do we care whether it was created by a woman entrepreneur or a man
Absolutely
entrepreneur?
right. Nobody does.
I don't think so. We go there, we look at the product, we look at the price, we look at its quality. We don't care who built it, who made it, who created it. We buy it. So in a company also, we hire managers and we hire general managers. We don't hire women or men. They have to be competent. That's all, period. And if there's an equal amount of competence over there, I would give priority to a woman or a priority to a man just because there was a gender difference over there.
Yeah.
I know there is something called inclusion, and a lot of civilizations and countries and laws and rules are made so that the black people could come in and they become part of the larger economy because they didn't get opportunity. Karachi has been suffering because of different reasons for the same reason. The government today has got not very competent officers because they thought that all the provinces must get their share and they should get people over there from all provinces. And today we are all facing the difficulties that we are all facing. So why can't we talk of, as even in ethics, where does it say that hiring a woman is more ethical than hiring a man? Or having a daughter is more ethical than having a son? See, so I wouldn't like to get into that debate. I'll be very, very pragmatic about it. And sorry, it is against the conventional wisdom, but this is how I feel about it.
I think the Almaz Saab makes an important
I don't
point,
think we're speaking at
and it's
cross
probably
purpose.
worth debating. It's worth debating, but I would like to say, I would like to just add that, and it's not just a question of women. It can be, we have in our own country, we have locations and provinces where opportunities are less compared to others. We have globally, whether it's black, whether it's people, whoever. And I think if one ignores the historical historical development, because if men or out in the West, the white men have been predominantly in management for the last 250 years since the modern company started, then obviously you're going to find more men who are competent managers. So do you then reinforce that bias forever? Or do you take some proactive steps to redress that balance and then see how other communities can be brought in? And we are suffering from this globally because right now it's literally a handful of less than 10 white men that are setting the standards for ethics and how people interact with each other sitting in Silicon Valley. And they are taking the decisions of how 3, 4, 5 billion people are socially interacting with each other. And how is that going to impact and evolve societies? We've seen issues with Facebook. We just saw the banning and then the starting again of TikTok. And these are important things as business leaders for us to think about. Otherwise, we can continue as we are, and that will just reinforce the status quo and reinforce whoever is in privilege and in power.
Absolutely. Nas?
Aisha, let me add here also, you had asked Almasab about re-engineering the system. So just a thought, again, there's been discussion at the global level about universal basic income, right? So when you talk about the system itself, and there's something to think about, when you have a universal basic income and one doesn't have to worry about the basic amenities of life, education, a lot of these things, when they're taken care of you, for you, it's easier to be ethical, right? I mean, that's really that is also a reality. So that doing that good and doing it the right way. So just a thought.
Actually, you started with that, if I remember, that one of the reasons why that ethical debate is itself questionable is you're under the poverty level and you need your basic needs satisfied. You can't expect the same perhaps degree of ethical behavior. So yes, the system does need to be re-engineered. I don't think anyone could have an issue with that. I think we might have time for some questions and answers now. Shireen?
Hi, Aisha. Thank you, everyone, for a truly refreshing conversation. Quite a lot of our work at CERB and PBC is engaging with your businesses, but also larger companies in Pakistan in these areas of gender, transforming business culture, and ethical practices. And so one area that I would personally want to hear more about, specifically speaking as a youth of the nation, we're going through COVID currently. Some people like to refer to it as the post-COVID crisis, although I don't know how much of it is post-COVID just yet. But when we talk about climate change and biodiversity loss, we say that will be the next large crisis. I mean, it is already a crisis in my opinion. And so what are your organizations, or what are some of your thoughts on this being something to take note of when talking about inclusive and economic growth for the nation?
Well, I could just first inform of the state bank regulations on green banking. Those are fairly detailed and they're also very wide-ranging. And they include not just what the institution does on its own, but also the footprint for all of the borrowers that we lend to. So that's a good start. Obviously, it's still new. I don't think many of us give it quite the importance that we should, but it's certainly a start. And I know that the next stage will be the state bank penalizing you for the more obvious transgressions. Already as a bank, we are asked to quantify the kind of climate change risk that is involved in our lending decisions to each project. So it is a start. And I think it's about time, because we are going to be one of the worst hit countries as far as climate change goes. And yes, we are not really talking about it as much as we should.
If you allow me, Shireen, again, just adding to what Aisha mentioned, yes, obviously State Bank has regulations which we're all required to follow and abide by. I think as the world becomes smaller and smaller, we have, for example, as an organization, we have large international shareholders, and they have certain requirements of us as a shareholder as well, which we're required to follow. So organizations will need to follow it whether they like it or not. I think what's going to be different or will vary is the pace at which it's going to change, and how quickly as a nation and as a country we start to recognize how important it is and what our roles are in that.
Absolutely. There is a question: to ensure social mobility, do panelists support progressive quotas since there's no equality of opportunity? Interesting question. Who would like to take it? Farooq?
Sure, Aisha. I think again it's an important question that we as leaders do need to think about in our businesses, and we spoke about. So if we maybe just take the example of women that we've been discussing, there is regulations now for listed companies to have certain number of directors. I think after that, the boards really need to make sure that that's cascades down into the organization. It may not always be possible to have quotas, but for example, I gave the PSX's example that for every position that we interview for, the shortlist that's mandated must include a woman, and if it is not, then that has to be really rigorously justified as to why the manager and the HR were not able to find at least one candidate. And I think those sort of measures are important because you will probably need to work a little bit harder and do a bit more outreach to identify and find people from disadvantaged backgrounds, or whether it's gender diversity or geographical diversity. And I think it's important to make sure that your organization is making that effort. In the end, there could be in some position that you're not able to find anyone that is suitable, and then you can't sort of compromise on the efficiency or the need for that job. But it is important to push everyone to make that effort, because if we make that effort, then generally you are able to find people who are suitable, and over time that process then cascades into more diversity and provides people opportunity to grow.
Absolutely. I don't think we have any other questions.
Actually, I have a question for our panelists. Aisha, can I go ahead?
Please go ahead, Omar.
Thank you. So I was listening very intently to the conversation and listening to especially Almasa. The question is about moral dilemmas that we face. You were, Aisha, talking about the banking sector very rightly. I also work with IBP and State Bank for training the bankers. And I found that often they complained about being pushed for targets as a justification for moral compromises. I hope we all understand where I'm referring to. So in such scenarios, or just like the preceding question, which Farooq Saab very nicely answered, in the cases of areas where we need people from disadvantaged backgrounds or backgrounds which need to be included for diversity, there is also a cost. Like we were having this discussion that it is mandatory now to push these areas to be included rather than letting that inherent bias go on. But there is a cost to that, because initially when we'll be getting these people on, there would need to be an element of compromise, maybe not in terms of doing the job, but in terms of not getting maybe 100, maybe compromising for a 98. So there's a cost associated with that and the impact, which brings another ethical dilemma. So in case of such tough choices, or as I previously referred to the banking sector as a case in point, our panelists, how do they take these decisions? Do they go with the right, hard, ethical choices, or do they try to find a middle ground? If all the panelists could kindly share their views on this.
Let me take the first go at it, if you don't mind. Okay, I think we should differentiate between ethical issues and social and anthropological issues. What you are discussing are not ethical issues. Ethical issue is about right and wrong, about doing or not doing, about the boundaries that you create around yourself, and so on. So I personally think that let's separate the sociological issues with the rest. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
And if you can separate them, then I find that every time we were ethical, we took a different leap into growth. For example, the customers like transparent suppliers, and we think that telling a lie to the customer is okay. It's not okay. Every time we went out and said this is faulted, not do what we were supposed to do or whatever, I think those are the ethical issues. Hiring gender-wise or geographical-wise or country-wise are not ethical issues. I think those are the issues that the governments normally at a macro level, they decide on the macro level about how they think the development should happen and where the development should go. Then they start investing, for example, in education. The first thing that should happen is investment in education and health, rather than asking somebody to give a job to somebody who is not qualified for that particular job. So that makes us as a country or as a company really inefficient and uncompetitive, and that's not what should be happening. So let's separate the debate of what is ethical and what is socially, which should happen socially or anthropologically. So I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Let me just I would echo Alma Saab's view. I mean, obviously there are areas that you go and hire in where the quality of resources, the education system is very weak, and we know which areas those are. You just still go and try and get the best resources you can there, and then focus on them and develop them. Yeah, that's a cost of doing business. You have to spend more time and effort in developing them, and that's what you do. There's no second thought about that one. So I would agree. It's not. I don't think it's an ethical issue. It's a macro social issue in terms of how much we're spending on and focusing on education.
Could I draw your attention to the first question, because I think all the focus is now on the second point. The first question was about tough ethical business dilemmas like bankers faced. If you want, I can elaborate more. When they are pushed for target and they even go for lending to people they should not otherwise. So I'll be very clear about that. Yeah.
Okay. Let me try and respond to that. I agree, and it happens. It's a fact. And so that's when initially when we start talking, I talked about mis-selling, and mis-selling happens. There are state bank regulations around it as well. So the regulator is very clear that these are the boundaries you can't cross. And so what you try and do is educate and your staff and let them know, like, look, this is what you need to do. These are your targets, but these boundaries you can't cross. And if they do cross those boundaries, then they need to understand that the repercussions are serious. So yes, I mean, we all have goals and objectives and targets as an institution and an organization as well, and we focus on that. But you have to do it the right way, and that's the message you need to drive. Is you will have to do that business. You'll have to do it the right way. If you want to take a shortcut, and if you want to try and go sell insurance by saying invest in this and you'll double your money in 3 years, and then that's sheer mis-selling. You will not be in the organization for very long. Simple.
But Umar, in many ways, if you, from just an accounting perspective, we're moving towards IFRS 9, that short-term mindset that allowed us to write assets and write business and get the advantage this year. Gradually, that's focusing, that's moving out anyways. It'll happen internally. It'll happen through a realization by the boards that it's not only about profit, and that bonuses have to be linked to much more than what the bottom line is. And it'll also come through regulatory structural changes, like how you present your balance sheet, how you show your numbers. So I think that's already happening, although a little slowly and a little late.
Very
No,
good point
it is
about that.
happening.
In fact,
It
I'll
is
tie that up with what you shared before about the regulators' powers, about the example that you were quoting about pushing for the shareholders' benefit, the dividend to be paid in certain cases, etc. So I agree with you. Could you please ask Farooq Saab specially and then Naz for their views whether they believe that social elements, social questions have an ethical aspect to them or not? Because the way I see things, and many members, ACCA is the largest global accounting body. Many members come to us with these questions and challenges that it's not just the regulator's job alone. The businessman, the professional, the finance professional, all of us in our individual capacities, when we start doing the right thing, then the ethical core of the moral and ethical fiber starts getting more stronger by the day. So if Farooq Saab could kindly shed his views and some light on this.
Ji Umar, thank you. I think just hearing the discussion again, if we believe that the sole purpose of a business is to maximize profitability, then I think what the discussion was being held hands true, and then everything else is the responsibility of the government. But if we believe that a business has a responsibility which goes beyond that, which includes looking after all stakeholders, and can a business believe that it is ethical if 50% of the population is excluded from decision making or is excluded from having the opportunities to get jobs? I think then that's fine. We can say this is the government's problem. My job is to get just get the best manager and make the most money, and that is how obviously business has been done for the last 250 odd years. But I personally believe that business has a greater responsibility, and if a business doesn't address, for example, gender inequality, then the business itself suffers, and the country's economic growth and prospect itself suffers. So we can either leave it to the government, or we as business leaders also take responsibility for it, because in the end, it will help the entire country's economy grow. So that is my perspective on it. And even talking about more narrowly on accounting and accounting standards, I feel very clearly that in the next 10 years, today all investment decisions are made on a risk-return paradigm, on a duality of risk and return. Back in the 70s, in fact, there was no concept of risk. It was only done on the basis of return. I believe in the next 10 years, and there are accounting standards already being developed, particularly in the UK, where I believe it'll be a triangular paradigm on which all decisions will be made and businesses will have to report, which is on a risk, return, and impact. And impact will not just include, and right now it's more focused on environment, because whether we accept it or not, all of us are impact investors. Everything that we do has an impact. And too long we have not accounted for it, and government, taxpayers, civil organizations have had to pick up the burden of the impact, that the negative impact that businesses have created, whether it's carbon, whether it is industries not properly accounting for the pollution that they create, etc. But that is where it's a cost of the business, which currently is not accounted for in the way accounting is done presently. But I believe that is already changing. It will continue to change, and we will have accounting standards which will require businesses to account for such externalities or external costs as well. So that's my view on the 2 points that you raised over.
Thank you, Farooq sir. If Aisha, you could ask from Naz, being the final panelist, that what Farooq sir referred to, these green taxes are happening. I actually took part from ACCA's behalf on a green taxes project that is being done in Europe, and they have done study all over the world.
I think we've lost Umar Saab. But Naz, do you have anything to add to Farooq's point here?
Thank you, Asha. So I think the only thing I would really say here is, ethics, and he's talking about societal and ethics, and really it is like Almasab said, when you talk about that boundary, so it's personal and it's organizational, but in essence it's self-governing, right? And there has to be an integrity-based system. So I think it's when you talk of ethics, to me it's a larger issue. Really, it's not just a business issue. We can try to do it within business, but I think recently, in fact, I'll just share with you. Someone forwarded me, articles you keep getting because we're inundated with information, and we get so much information. How should you organize what you should read, what you should not read? And they had a very nice grade by HBR, by Harvard Business Review, on what you should read, what you should not read, and this is important, this is not. And I just said, this article is all very worker-based and it's very skill-based. All it's talking about what you should read and put them in boxes, read this later, read this now. But I said, if this was the case, it just ignores the fact that there are much larger things to read. You would never read Aristotle or a Plato, and the article started off with quotes related to that. So it's about being a good person. It's about being a good citizen, right? That's being a citizen. And some of this needs to start from the education system. And whenever I talk to people, previous generation, many of them talk about how they used to be civic and those kind of courses in schools. And I don't know where that has gone now. So a lot of this needs to start coming into our system. Companies are for profit, they are bubbles, and yes, you can do whatever you can do over here, and you can certainly now, the more responsible companies have realized that inclusiveness is really important. So what you do is you try to improve people, not through CSR, but through an inclusive value chain, where you start bringing your entire supply chain, develop your vendor, develop that, so that you start bringing the entire chain up. So that's inclusiveness. So you realize that that's the right way to go. But it's actually a much larger debate and issue. So I'll just leave it at that.
That's true. I think we've also run out of time. So thank you.
Can I just compliment the everybody here, especially Naz? That was a great closing comment, Naz.
So on that great closing comment, we can close. And I think the organizers are going to move on to their next session. So thank you very much, everyone. Good to see you all here. And that was an interesting debate. Good.
Thank you all.